from the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal. This is All Things with Kim Strassel.
The Senate enters a crucial week as it races to finish its one big, beautiful bill. Will they get it over the finish line? Welcome to All Things with Kim Strassel. And joining me to answer that question and others is the man who really is at the center of this entire Senate drama, Majority Leader John Thune. Senator, thank you so much for being here. First time on the podcast.
Yeah, indeed. Great to be with you as always. Well, I shouldn't say as always, but in terms of the podcast, thank you. Yes.
Exactly. Before anything else, just a little bit of news. The strikes on Iran. Do you think this ceasefire Donald Trump announced between Israel and Iran is going to last?
I hope it does. Obviously, there's a lot at stake in the region, and I think the president acted wisely, courageously over the weekend and has set the stage for a negotiation that wouldn't have been made possible had it not been for that. So I'm hopeful that this will last. Everybody can get to the table and, we can work something out that will help stabilize and bring a more peaceful outcome to an area of the world where Iran's been terrorizing it for the last 50 years. So it's a work in progress, but I feel really good about where we are, and I think the president's the right person to get this done.
Yeah, it is good to see movement, and I don't think that would have happened without those strikes. But a number of Democrats are claiming this was illegal, that the president should have obtained permission from Congress. Will the Senate end up having a vote on Tim Kaine's War Powers Resolution legislation designed to rein in a president's authority to authorize strikes?
We will, mainly because it's privileged. He can require or secure a vote on that, and that'll probably happen this week, Kim. But I think in the end, I don't think there's any question the president has the authority legally and constitutionally to do what he did. There are always questions around these things, but past presidents of both political parties have similarly acted in circumstances where there have been airstrikes and at various places around the world where our national security interests dictated it. So I think the president was perfectly within his authority, and I'm hopeful that resolution will be defeated on the floor this week.
So the big, beautiful bill, the one big, beautiful bill, the House sent you its product more than a month ago now, and your goal has been, at least a soft target, was to actually start voting on this in the Senate by Thursday. How's that schedule going?
We're on it. I mean, what I've said is we're going to finish it this week or next week, however long it takes. The thing that we're waiting on right now, and as you know, in the Senate, the so-called Byrd process rules that we're subject to that the House is not, these meetings with the parliamentarian to determine what is and what isn't eligible for reconciliation takes a lot of time. So the Democrats and Republicans are meeting right now. My staff is meeting with the parliamentarian and the Democrats, arguing over certain provisions that the Democrats think ought to be struck, that we are arguing ought to be maintained. And once those rulings are done, once she's gotten through that process, I think we'll be in a position to move. But my intention is to have this thing done before the Senate breaks. And so whether that happens on Thursday, Friday, or Saturday remains to be seen, but it will happen.
Do you think the Senate parliamentarians process will be done by the end of today?
Frankly, that right now what she's on is the finance title. And the finance provisions, the Finance Committee in the Senate, which has jurisdiction over health care and tax policy, were probably the most litigated pieces of this prior to these birdbath negotiations or discussions starting, because we had done a lot of work when the House was acting on this. We sort of pre-vetted a number of these provisions. So I would say the work on the finance, tax, and healthcare provisions is probably 80 to 90% done. And I'm hoping that most of what we were able to do has been retained. There have been some things that have been knocked out by the parliamentarian that the House had in there. There's about $200 billion in savings that were in the House bill that now she's knocked out. And so we lose the score there. So we're trying to make up for it in some other areas. But, in the end, it's really a function of, getting through this and pushing it as far as you can and trying to come up with a plan B or plan C, contingency plans. At first, you don't succeed in trying to get as much of the president's agenda included in the reconciliation bill as possible.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that a little bit more. And just to make sure our listeners understand that the birdbath process, the parliamentarian, there's some very strict rules. She's the kind of final referee on whether or not a provision is likely to qualify under reconciliation. She has scrubbed a couple of things. I have to say I was a little surprised by. I don't know if you were surprised or not. A couple of those big ones, and that would have been a big knock to your score. One of them was food stamp cost sharing with the states, zeroing out the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, some land sales. Are you guys going to actually try to revamp those in a way that get them back in, or are you just going to move on and attempt to find some other provisions that save some money?
Well, in most of those cases, we have a plan B and a plan C. And right now we're going back at her on some of the food stamp provisions, because obviously you'd articulated this, and for your listeners who probably don't care a lot about this, but this bird test that we have to go through in the Senate, it's named after a Democrat senator way back in the day. But in 1985, they codified the so-called bird rule. It's a 6-part test to be eligible for consideration or reconciliation. But probably the most significant of the 6-part test is whether or not it's principally about spending and revenue, or whether it's about policy. If it's principally about policy and the spending and revenue provisions are only incidental to that, then it gets struck. Well, there are a number of things that you mentioned that she ended up striking, some of which were expected, but some of which were not. And with respect to the food stamp program with SNAP, we've had contingency plans. We're going back at her, and we think we'll get a lot of that restored. At least that's the plan at the moment, and we'll see where she ultimately comes down. But all this stuff gets litigated in front of her. And, some of these things we sort of knew going in, and even the Democrats, when they were doing this, when they had unified control of the government, had things knocked out. They tried to raise the minimum wage in reconciliation, and she struck it. They tried to deal with the DACA population, legalizing DACA, folks in this country in reconciliation. She struck that. So it's not unusual, but it's a hard vetting process, and it's just something that we have to subject the budget reconciliation bill in the Senate to, that the House doesn't. And regrettably, we lose some things along the way, but we're still going to get a ton of what we wanted in this, and this is the president's agenda. And so this will be the fulfillment and implementation of that, and we're full speed ahead in trying to get it done.
We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, more with the Senate Majority Leader, John Thune. Welcome back. I'm here with Senator John Thune from South Dakota, talking about the One Big Beautiful Bill. Since we're geeking out about obscure policy and procedural issues, I'm just going to fully embrace that and ask one more question. One of the things that, if she is going through the finance piece of this, that is one of the biggest issues I know you guys have been focused on, is how this bill is actually scored, and in particular, whether or not you are allowed to do it on what's called a current policy basis, i.e. to assume that the existing tax code is what it is and is what it would be going forward, which would, I think, make all of this, obviously it's about accounting, but it would make the number better on paper. Do you guys think you get that through her?
Well, we do. And, we did in the budget resolution, which is the first step. This is a 2-step process. The budget resolution is followed by budget reconciliation. And the budget resolution is largely aspirational, but it kind of lays out what your general targets are. And then budget reconciliation actually makes law. And that's when you get into the really specifics of legislating. And so as we went through the budget resolution, however, we made it very clear that we believe that under the law, the budget committee chairman is able to make the determination about whether you use current policy baseline or current law baseline. And again, for your listeners, a distinction that's really meaningful, particularly when it comes to tax policy, because if you use current law baseline, you're assuming at the end of the year that all these taxes that go up, are going to generate all this additional revenue. And frankly, we believe that if you're extending current policy, it shouldn't have that score.
Right.
And so the current policy baseline enables us to do the extension of the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act without having, this $3.8 trillion score associated with it, because we believe that's an extension of the current policy. And we've always believed that you don't pay for extending existing tax policy. And the Democrats, of course, have a different view of that. But the rules that are used around here traditionally have always favored more spending, and they favor Democrats. And so there's an inertia toward more spending. And the scorekeepers around here just over the last many decades have been sort of, I guess you could argue, complicit in that. And we think otherwise. We think that when you're extending existing tax policy, that's not something that ought to be, you ought to attribute $3.8 trillion in deficits as a result of that. We think you're going to get growth because you're extending economic policy that's been very successful in incentivizing investment and creating jobs.
Right. And that is why this may sound geeky, but it's actually so important. So thank you.
It's huge.
A couple of other things. The Senate, understandably, has some priorities and objectives that vary a little bit from some of the objectives in the House bill that came to you. And as a result, there are some big pieces of that House product that are under a microscope and potentially might get a little change. One of the biggest of those is the state and local tax deduction. I know that Senator Mark Wayne Mullen is negotiating with House SALT members. The Senate GOP doesn't really have a constituency for raising that level up. It's currently at $10,000, what you can deduct. The House product said $40,000. It's really expensive, $350 billion. What compromise is there to be had on this? And will you get one?
We are working very, very hard to find that. We kind of knew this would be the last thing to land and this would be the last issue to get resolved because there is such a huge difference in the view of this with respect to Republicans in the House and Republicans in the Senate. And in the House, they made a deal because they got a very narrow margin and obviously they needed every vote. And so the votes of a handful of people from New York mostly who care about this issue, there was a deal that had to be struck. But that deal actually scored at about $353 billion, which that's a big no in the Senate. And so our members, of course, and I'm one of them, who believes that this was one of the most important policy changes that we made in the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and that is to get away from the practice of having low tax states subsidize high tax states, which is why this cap is in current law. But we understand we're going to have to get this across the finish line and on the president's desk, come up with an accommodation for members in the House who care deeply about this issue. So there are several iterations of this, and we've been shopping potential landing places out there. I think we will eventually get there, but we knew this would probably be the last issue that we would close out before we get a bill on the Senate floor. There is that big of a difference between the House and Senate. I mean, you're going from zero interest in the Senate on this to doing anything other than what the current law allows for to, in the House side, this being the difference between them passing it or not passing it. So it's a hard one, Kim. Again, I hate to see what I think is really good policy in the 2017 bill being sort of eroded, but I also understand that we've got to get a bill to the president, and we don't get the votes in the House unless we figure out how to resolve this issue.
Speaking of the president, he weighed in on Saturday, and this is a topic that is of particular interest to me, about the decision in the Senate to water down and retain more of these green tax credits that have been so big part of Joe Biden's agenda. He called them the green scam. He asked that they all get cut. Are they going to get curbed as part of this bill more than they are at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, we're very close to where the House was. We have folks in the Senate who have businesses in their states that have made investments based upon current law. And so we're trying to find ways to create an off-ramp there or a phase down, if you will. But by and large, yes, I mean, there aren't any of these credits, well, maybe with one or two exceptions, that have strong Republican support that aren't going away and going away soon. And you look at all the EV credits, for example, and used cars, new vehicles, commercial vehicles, we wind those down before the end of the year. And so does the House. And that saves you about $200 billion. And then if you look at the ITC and PTC, which is, a lot of that's where the big amounts of the Biden era, the IRA type tax credits land. There's about $200 billion there. And both us and the House are very close in getting rid of that. So in the end, it'll be in the ballpark of $500 billion in savings attributable to getting rid of all that IRA, the green new scam, as the president characterizes it. They will probably save maybe 20 billion more, 25 billion more, only because of things that we, in response to senators' concerns, that we've had to make some mild adjustments to. But by and large, it's going to be a big number of savings. And as a result of clawing back stuff that shouldn't have been done in the first place and is completely inconsistent with what most Republicans believe is the right policy with respect to incentivizing energy production in this country.
Yeah, well, I hope so. Those things have become kind of a never-ending menace, so it'll be nice to see more of them ended. We're going to take one more break. When we come back, more on the final stages of the reconciliation process.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is All Things with Kim Strassel.
Welcome back. I'm Kim Strassel here with Majority Leader John Thune. The one other constituency out there that remain kind of unhappy are some of the fiscal conservatives in the Senate. They went to see the president on Sunday. Are they going to end up getting enough in savings in this bill to be comfortable with it?
Well, I hope so. And, I'm somebody who would go a lot farther. And I share the view that a number of our colleagues who want to see more savings in the bill share. But I also have the job of trying to get 51. And it is a very fine line. And right now, everybody's unhappy, which suggests that maybe we're getting close to the sweet spot. But yeah, I think if we can't start reforming and restructuring programs that have been way out of line in terms of spending. You look at Medicaid, for example, over the last 5 years, it's increased 50%. You just can't sustain that.
Right.
And we've got to return to fiscal sanity. So a lot of the reforms are reforms that get rid of waste, fraud, and abuse, that get the program back to its original intent to cover the people for which it was intended, and to get away from the way in which the program has metastasized into something completely different from what, it's designed to do. And so we are making a number of reforms and changes that will strengthen and improve Medicaid and achieve a significant level of savings. Couldn't we do more? Yeah, and I would. And the speaker has the same issue. We just met and, he's trying to strike that balance over there. But we view this as a first step. I think if we're going to get the country back on a sustainable fiscal path, we've got to start somewhere. And I think the reforms that are in this bill are important. They're structural reforms that start bending the spending curve down. And I think there'll be a lot more to do. But, $1.5 trillion to $2 trillion in savings will be the biggest spending reduction in American history, coupled with the changes in tax policy, both extending existing tax policy and some of the new things that the president includes in the bill, I think are going to be incredibly stimulative to the economy and create the growth that we all want, that will make the country, more prosperous. And when you get more prosperity and people investing and making money and taking realizations, you get more tax revenue. So we get good growth policies on regulations and energy and taxes, coupled with starting to just bend that curve down in the right direction. I think we can start making some headway toward what should have been done a long time ago, and that is getting this country out of $35 to $38 trillion in debt.
And that reminds me, I forgot to congratulate you and a number of other warriors in the Senate who got one of the more important provisions, in my mind, into the Senate version of this bill, which is tax permanence for a number of business provisions, which should be enormous for that growth. Senate Majority Leader John Thune, thank you so much for coming in. I do not envy you and your task ahead, but we are all looking forward to see how it turns out, and we hope you'll come back. We thank our listeners. If you enjoy the show, please hit the subscribe button. And if you'd like to write to us, you can at atkim@wsj.com.